Alright guys, my name is Nathaniel, and today I'm going to be talking about the types of aircraft engines that you find on modern day aircraft, so nothing the World War II or experimental. Pretty much modern aircraft engines are broken down into two types of engines. You have piston engines and you have turbine engines. Thank you to Cameron for explaining in depth how turbine engines work. Piston engines, the piston turns a crankshaft which drives a propeller, and the propeller is what generates thrust for the aircraft. And then turbine engines, the exhaust gases mainly produce thrust for the aircraft. Here are two examples of piston aircraft engines. They're generally lower horsepower ranges, normally about 100 horsepower to maybe up to like 450 horsepower. Like I said, not like World War II where they were just bolting a bunch of huge displacement engines and getting up to like 4,000 horsepower. Really modern day engines are piston engines are just about 100 horsepower to about 400, 450 horsepower. The advantages of them, they have lower fuel consumption and much cheaper production costs compared to turbine engines. And you can see that the engines here are actually just driving propellers. And these are, the bottom left is just a simple 4-seat aircraft, and the one on the right is just a 6-seat aircraft. So smaller aircraft sizes to go with the lower horsepower output. Next we have turbine aircraft engines, pretty much what you find on jets. The exhaust gases that generate the thrust. Much higher thrust output because of heavier weights, and jets like to go fast, so you need the thrust for that too. Turbine aircraft have simpler designs, much less moving parts, and this is good mechanically. Less things moving means less things that break, and that's good from an operator standpoint. However, because of the high temperatures that turbine engines tend to operate on, the engines themselves are much more expensive. Sometimes a simple turbine blade can be like $2,000. So next we have the turboprop, which is kind of the best of both worlds between piston aircraft and turbine aircraft. So this aircraft on the right-hand side right here is actually a jet engine. It's a turbine airplane, a turbine engine, but it has a propeller bolted on the front of it. And by doing that, you get the best of both worlds. The turbine, it spins pretty fast, about 30, 40,000 RPM. So there's a reduction gearbox because the propeller only spins about 2,000 RPM. But it's middle of the pack in both fuel consumption, thrust output, and operating altitudes. Piston aircraft generally sea level to 10,000 feet, operating altitudes. Jets 30 to 40,000 feet. So these turboprops are kind of right in the middle in that respect. Then we have two different types of turboprop aircraft. We have fixed shaft turboprops on the left-hand side, and then we have free turbine on the right-handed side. The reason it's called a fixed shaft is if you kind of follow with your eyes on the left picture from the propeller, it goes to a reduction gearbox, and then that's attached to the main shaft on the second shaft below. But that entire shaft, everything is attached right there. All the compressors and turbines all run along the same shaft right there. So if the compressor is turning, so are the turbines. That's different from the free turbine on the right-hand side right here, where there's actually a separation between two shafts. This shaft could turn without this shaft turning. So just because the compressors are turning doesn't necessarily mean that the turbines are turning. And also, just reviewing on this one, the airflow is important to note. The airflow on the fixed shaft, it goes in through the front and out through the back, pretty straightforward, kind of what you'd expect. However, a free turbine is a reverse airflow. The air inlet actually comes through the back of the engine, goes through, mixes with the fuel, ignites, goes through the turbine, and then comes out the front of the engine. So if you compare a fixed shaft turboprop and a free turbine turboprop, these are actually the exact same aircraft, except they have the different engines. Pretty much the way to remember it or to realize it is the fixed shaft turboprop, because the air goes in through the front and out through the back. You notice how far back the exhaust shafts are. That's your indication right there, where the exhaust stacks on the reverse flow free turbine aircraft are pretty much right at the front of the engine, right behind the propellers. And that's because it's the reverse flow. So then we have turbofan engines. This is pretty much what you find under modern day aircraft engines for airliners. You know, you go fly on Southwest, this is what these aircraft have, the Boeings and everything. It is a turbine engine, however, turbofans have a bypass component to it. So it's pretty much like a propeller. What number one is pointing to right there sucks in air just like a propeller would, and actually the majority of the airflow goes around the engine and produces thrust that way, just from pushing it out behind the engine. This is called the bypass air, and bypass air generally will contribute 60 to 80% of the thrust, which is different from a turbojet engine. Back in the 50s and 60s when jets first came out, they just burned fuel like crazy. They were crazy inefficient. If you ever see the first jets when they take off and they're streaking black smoke behind them, those didn't have any kind of bypass air whatsoever. So they were burning a lot more fuel, but you did get a little bit more thrust out of them. So, pop quiz time. Does anyone want to tell me, let's start with the aircraft on the right. Is that a turbine aircraft or a piston aircraft?
Piston.
Awesome. All right. Left-hand side right there. Turbine or piston?
Both,
Okay, both. Why do you say both?
because it has an engine and propellers.
So it can actually still be a turbine aircraft even if it has a propeller. So the actual engine itself is a turbine aircraft. I'll give you one anything.
Alright.
So double or nothing on the left-hand side right there. Is that a fixed shaft or a free shaft? Or a, oh, I gotta give someone else a try. Go ahead.
Looks like a free shaft with reverse flow.
That is a reverse flow free shaft, so you get 2 for that. All right, good job, guys. So any questions?
What are the advantages and disadvantages to a free or fixed setup?
So that is a very good question. In simple terms, with the fixed shaft, or actually with either of them, the turbines need to run under a certain load in order to keep like the fire, the combustion inside the engine spinning. So pretty much those turbines need to spin at a very specific speed. If these guys are spinning at a set speed, that means you can't really adjust the speed of your propeller RPM. Well, that's kind of inconvenient if you're trying to take off or land where you're adjusting your throttle settings. Whereas the free turbine on the right, this turbine can spin at whatever speed it needs to because it's not physically attached to that propeller. So you can actually adjust your propeller RPM a lot more on the free turbine, which is convenient because propellers generate a whole lot of noise. So if you're able to reduce the propeller RPM a lot, your passengers and your pilots and everybody around you really enjoys it. Actually, pilots have a saying that say fixed shaft turboprops are really good at converting jet fuel into noise. Simply because they have to spin at a very high RPM to keep that turbine spinning, and they're ridiculously loud on the ground. Any other questions?
That's all we got.